Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to the British School at Rome. Thank you for coming tonight for the first Fine Arts Talk of 2026. My name is Marta Pellerini, and I am Visual Art Residency and Program Curator here at the BSR. I am extremely honored to open this season with a lecture by Viviana Checchia, researcher, curator, and programmer, active internationally. Checchia is currently director of Void Art Centre in Derry, Northern Ireland, where she has initiated a living practice of social permaculture based on a group of principles that look to models of coexistence and co-creation. Since 2023, the Art Center has reimagined its organizational structure to focus on collaborative methods of working and sustainable use of local resources. Viviana is also a co-director of Vessel, an international curatorial platform based in Puglia, south of Italy, for the support of social, cultural, and economic development through contemporary art. Other posts include residency curator at Delphina Foundation, London, senior lecturer on the MFA at HD Eik Valand, University of Gothenburg, and public engagement curator at the Centre for Contemporary Arts in Glasgow. Viviana has produced and contributed to a range of international projects, including the Young Artist of the Year Award Ramallah and the 4th Athens Biennial. She has lectured on curatorial studies and contemporary art practice internationally, and she holds a PhD from Loughborough University that focuses on alternative Mediterranean curatorial practices. And now, without further delay, please join me in welcoming Viviana Checchia.
Just a disclaimer, this is not the font I had chosen for. It was a very nice font, but we had to move from K to to PowerPoint, and then I lost all the aesthetics of it. Very sorry about that. So I would like to invite you all to take a moment to say thank you. Thanks to the soil that is hosting us, the plants sharing this experience with us, the fungi and bacteria cohabitating with us, the carbon that took us here, the air enabling this gathering, and all the water invested in this event and our lives, and all our non-human ancestors whose joys and sacrifice took us all together here today. Every day, I would work with my family on the farm. We would have a moment of appreciation, like the one I'm trying to share with you right now. Caressing the water of the torrent flowing on our field, massaging the soil below our feet, or singing a little song to our tomatoes. Thanks all of you for being here, and a special thank you to my family for all the inspirations. They gave me in this life, sorry, and for being here in Rome today. Also, a special thank you to all the colleagues and friends who encouraged me along the way. In particular, Valerio del Baglivo, whose curatorial dedication gave me hope always. I would like to add a sincere thank you, a necessary thank you, to the British School of Rome, in particular to Marta Pellerini, who invited me here today, as well as to the rest of the team, Silvia, Pepe, Abigail, all the people that contributed to my journey here. Thank you so much. Thanks for giving me this opportunity. Thanks for bringing all of us together. Occasions like these help us reflect, connect, and progress further. So I would generally start my lectures unpacking the title, but for this time, you will need to bear with me and wait for the title to get naturally revealed during the course of this lecture. Hopefully that will do. Today's lecture derives from a keynote I presented in February 2025 in Cyprus for a symposium titled Learning from the Mountain. I then adapted it for a talk online hosted by Scottish Artists Union and Scottish Art Network, and then it's actually reached you here tonight. The lecture aims to share reflections on alternative nature-based models and approaches that have emerged recently in the art sector. Nature-based approaches consist in nature-oriented processes where nature converts into an organizational tool. So, if you would like to learn more about some of the ideas I'm going to share, you can get a copy of this interesting book edited by Anthony Schregg. And you can find me in section 3, Roles and Responsibilities, chapter 9, The Ethics of the Future, Cultural Emergence. So this is for the self-promotion. The question I use as a catalyst for this lecture has been, what can we learn from art organizations' attempts to adopt ecological and sustainable practices as we reconfigure our relationships with our surroundings? Though you're probably expecting this lecture to focus on nature, I believe it is important to mention that lots of attention will be given to these nature-based approaches as an anti-imperialist modus operandi in an hyper-colonial world where we are very much influenced by extractivist practices. My reflections and ambitions are less about the art connection with nature and with ecological thinking, and more about art as a natural system rather than a modernist one, and art as ecological thinking. The origin of what I'm thinking, or what I'm trying to address here, stands in the disassociation between the human and nature, and in particular, between culture and nature. This, once again, for me, is a result of a specific approach to the life on this planet based on practice of industrial progress rather than organic and harmonious development. I have personally devoted years to this connection, or disconnection, to better say, but I would like to mention some recent milestones. In September 2023, and in collaboration with the Hungarian curator Kristen Török, we curated an online event for CIMAM, the International Committee for Museums and Collections of Modern Art. Learning from eco-epistemologies, overcoming museological symbolism of natural forms brought together some interesting institutional examples working at the intersection between art and nature. Emma Nicholson, you can see her here, who at that time was head of arts and at the Royal Botanic Garden in Edinburgh, working with a botanic garden. Carla Sanchez, director of Blackbird Culture Lab, Wexford, Ireland, working with art and regenerative farming. Chus Martinez, CIMAM board member, director of the Institute of Art, Gender, Nature in Basel, Switzerland, and associate curator of TBA 21, leading the ocean space in Venice, working with a farming environment as well as the ocean. As part of the turn towards a more ecologically connected art institution, one that can expand towards multi-species understanding, Kristen and I, together with our guests, wanted to question how exposure to nature has influenced institutional behavior. Rather than simply looking at how organizations are addressing their new relationship to nature, or how they are trying to respond to the current ecological and climate crisis, we wanted to explore the nature of the cross-pollination with the institutional modus operandi coming directly from the natural world. And we wanted to question not so much how we observe nature via the recent museological development, but rather how nature is transforming the museum by influencing and altering institutional dynamics. In what ways institutions, such as museums, are really learning from nature and moving behind a simplistic or symbolic connection to a bucolic past or a rural idyll. We were interested then in how museums might acquire an authentic natural politics beyond an instrumentalization of the natural world for their own human institutional benefit, focusing on 4 different themes: flora, fauna, forest, and sea space. We tried to embrace different entry points to nature and different ways of learning from nature. We investigated a new institutional critique based on environmental humanities and patterns and insights from the natural world. During this event, it emerged quite significantly, I would say, that the exposure to nature had an impact on the individuals invested in the organizations involved in the panel, though the bigger the organization, the less evident the impact nature had on institutional strategies. So as you can see, I'm still kind of setting the scene for all of you to understand what we are really talking about here. And in this slide, you can see 3 different examples of nature-focused show in London just in the last couple of years, soon in the last couple of 3 years, I would say, addressing nature by representing it within exhibition devices or by becoming more green still runs the risk, in my opinion, of not accepting that we are nature. There is no need to bring more nature in our galleries or in our ecosystem if our approach remains modernist and disassociated. I would like to privilege an engagement where we conceive of ourselves and the organizations we run as part of nature, and we start to act as such, following its principles and its dynamics. So I am advocating to curate like the plants, to think like the water, to lead like the sea, or to organize like the air. The proposal would consist of learning from these systems and reconnecting to nature via the arts. How would we curate following plant dynamics? How would we lead with the sea rhythm and components? How would we organize as if we were here? Obviously, this would imply a transformation in our conception of time and space, something I've been advocating in my practice as well as in my PhD since the last 15 years now. By the way, if you ever run out of chamomile or valerian and you really want a good sleep, you can find my PhD online. And yeah, I would highly recommend it. It's quite an extensive piece of work, but it could be a little bit boring at some point, I would say. But let's pause on the concept of time for a moment. Sociologist John Hurry speaks in his book of instantaneous time. Time has become an instant, something impossible to grasp as we live in a global present. It becomes hard for us, mere humans, to hold a conception of past, present, and future, and this inability feeds the sense of disengagement from reality. In The Ethics of Art, sociologist and dear friend Pascal Guillen refers to Hurry's conception of time. Guillen reinforces for us the conception of timeless time, of the computer era, a phenomenon that moves even farther away from nature than the clock time that humans learned to know from the industrial era. The awareness that the internet is capable not only of storing data, but retrieving it immediately and from any moment in time has had an enormous impact on our relationship with time. As Hurry would say, past and present merge within a click. Time in the cultural sector might have shifted too, with the nature of declining, stable core funding, the rise of time-limited project funding, and the always-on pressure of seeking funding. The dynamics created are often akin to short-termism, a constant present of keeping going. To pause to advocate for the opposite type of time engagement seems important. And to take a cue from Gillen, as well as Guattari, reconnecting transversally with our base ecologies, with people, with the elements, with the land, can really serve as a more conscientious, careful, and possibly ethical way of working. So socially engage our practice inclined towards this way of ethically insisting on adequate time to see and challenge normative frameworks, to resist the normativity of speed and presentism, and to practice different understanding and use of space and time. Committing to a natural approach might offer counterpoint to the instantaneousness and stabilize a more natural human rhythm. So Gillen also refers to psychoanalyst Félix Guattari in order to argue for the interdependence of psyche, the social, and the environment. The thinking being, as long as current society refuses the interconnectedness between these three components of our life, the common consciousness will get more and more degraded and infantilized. So here I quote from Guattari. It is quite simply wrong to regard action on the psyche, the socials, the environment as separated. We need to kick the habit of sedative consumption, of television discourse in particular. We need to apprehend the world through the interchangeable lenses of the three ecologies. More than ever today, nature has become inseparable from culture. And if we are to understand the intersections between ecosystems and mechanosphere and the social and individual universes of references, we have to learn to think transversally, end of quote. While Gillen agrees with Guattari, he also adds that, and I quote, nature, socials, and psyche, all three are truly deterritorialized. Post-industrial capitalism, or integrated world capitalism, as he calls it, displaces not only individuals and societies, but also complete ecosystems. The responsibility for one immediate environment, social context, or circle becomes dysfunctional when one has to continuously move, either mentally or physically, in order to survive. Furthermore, those who become disengaged from solidarity structures are at the mercy of the here and now. They have to resort to short-term thinking, as they are obliged to quickly, flexibly, and opportunistically anticipate constantly changing and unpredictable opportunities. Certainly for illegal aliens, but also for freelancers, a long-term perspective becomes difficult to achieve, end of quote. As we know, there is a growing number of freelancers in the arts, and this demographic, even if not diasporic or migrant, is compelled by project work to be mobile and to relate frequently to environments very different from their own. Some art practitioners struggle to get a specialized education where they live, so they move in order to acquire specific knowledge and skills. Once they are done with their training, even if they go back home or stay in the city where they studied, they will potentially find a job somewhere else, and some of these jobs available will have limited duration of 5 years or less. Even if they stay put and deliberately develop their practice where they studied, the art system will invite them to be mobile in order to fulfill some of the professional development requirements, participate in biennials, research around the world while taking part in residencies, get some fellowships, renowned universities. All this seems indeed more conducive to short-term thinking and opportunistic behavior. So as you know, now we went through a little digression, explored time relationship, space relationship, and now let's go back to the connection with nature. In his book, Ideas to Postpone the End of the World, the Brazilian indigenous philosopher and environmental leader, Ailton Krenak, writes that the idea of humanity is a failed project invented by European colonizers. The project was already in place and that already failed when we joined the planet. This project created a notion of humanity separated from nature and perpetrated dynamics of annihilation and exploitation. On a very similar line of thought, indigenous climate activist and scholar Kylie Powys-White speaks in his paper, Is It Colonial Deja Vu? Indigenous Peoples and Climate Injustice, about cyclical history, directly entangled with colonialism, industrialism, and capitalism, reconnecting with nature as if it is separated from us would mean falling into this notion Elton Krenek refers to and keeping the cycles mentioned by Kylie Powys-White spinning. That is why my interest is more about embracing the so-called great turning and restarting this relationship by working as nature rather than working with nature. In a panel hosted at the Ujazdowski Castle Center for Contemporary Arts in Warsaw in 2018, titled How to Stay with the Trouble, Art Institutions and the Environmental Crisis, part of the exhibition Plasticity of the Planet, I tried to take the famous Donna Haraway motto, stay with the trouble, a little step farther by proposing to engage with the trouble. My proposal, since I was part of the panel, suggested the art field must first begin to address its own trouble before turning towards the social and ecological issues, whilst acknowledging them as interdependent. I tried to explain that much of the artward trouble results from mirroring industrial processes of progress and production and developing a monoculture which centers artistic protagonism. Not only that, I would say some of the nature and our connections we are currently witnessing within our sector are still based on what Australian philosopher and ecofeminist Val Plumwood would diagnose as the master model, a relationship based on a logic of domination mirroring major forms of oppression in Western culture, based on binary systems and indicating this external force of the humans as out of nature and in charge of it. This is what Plumwood meticulously explains in her book, Feminism and the Mastery of Nature, while proposing how we could overcome this binarism by resituating the human within the environment. My main critique in the 2018 panel I was part of, and the critique that I would still put forward today, was let's stop thinking about the environment as something out of us, out there, separated from us, and let's instead start thinking we are part of it, as most environmental humanities studies have tried to explain over the years. We are environment, and our first environment is the arts. Let's start from there. Let's engage with it before even stretching out towards the macro environment that contains us, nature. Let's deal with our nature first and sort out our unsustainability. While in 2018, I was the only member of this panel at the Ujazdowski Castle CCA, whose organization was keeping an eye on carbon footprint, and I was aware my journey to Poland would be my last travel of my carbon year. Today, 2026, I join all of you here knowing that not only there is more awareness about our ecological collapse, but there are at least 15 organizations I could name that are trying to work as nature, rather than just with nature, by adopting biodynamic agriculture tools or regenerative practices, as well as embracing the principle of social permaculture, like in my case. So let's now connect with the approaches a little bit. Regenerative agriculture, for example, is a holistic farming philosophy focused on restoring soil health, enhancing biodiversity, and sequestering carbon to combat climate change. So some people in the arts are now adopting some of these concepts for regenerative practice for organization and also art makers. Permaculture as a field was developed in Australia, initially during the 1970s by Bill Mollison and David Olmegren, and involved the design of permanent and sustainable agriculture system. I should say, this is what we know. This is what story is telling us. I'm pretty sure permaculture existed before these two men defined it as such, but this is what we are meant to know as the narrative of where it was and when it was defined. The main objective of permaculture is to create the conditions for individuals to work in harmony with nature, rather than have them disregarded as natural rhythms and systems or wars. Work against them sometimes even. It took some time for this approach to be accepted and implemented around the world. And now, without any controversy, but I would say in a quite established way, is used globally and expanded behind landscaping and agriculture. So what you see here are the permacultural principles. So permaculture is based on 3 pillars, which is people care, health care, and fair share. And then these are the principles that people are invited to use, apply, follow, if they want to practice permaculture. So some organizations are now attempting to practice social permaculture as an approach that looks to natural environments to model coexistence and co-creation. It is a way to design connections and relationships between people and environments. Social permaculture is a regenerative focused practice that aims to help us create ways of living and being that are in harmonious connection with our shared planet. It is a practice centered around restorative care of people and the planet. The idea of permaculture is that the answers to our challenges and crises are to be found in nature's incredible abundance and diversity. Of course, it must be noted that this idea is nothing new under the sky for lots of people like myself who grew up in a non-fully industrialized country. Instead, it is rather new and not adherent to the culture developed with the industrialized society. Permaculture has now evolved into something much broader. It now embraces all aspects of how we live and how we work together. And this is what I would also call social permaculture, the application of permaculture to life and work. So, last winter, to the lead of what was my keynote in Cyprus and what is now the lecture I'm sharing with you, I spent quite some time learning more about some of these organizations and reaching out to some of them and discovering their experiences. After the keynote, I actually kept investigating, had more conversation. But due to the time at my disposal today, I opted for the presentation of only 8 of them, different profiles and based in France, Germany, England, Ireland, and Scotland. I noticed some common patterns. Some of these organizations did not feel ready to share their social permaculture experience, and therefore they will not be mentioned in this lecture. They felt that even if they are testing it, they are not yet confident in sharing the experience and wouldn't have enough evidence to share it anyway. So interestingly, this would be a good sign of them following the principle that you can see there, use small and slow solutions. So you don't do everything at once and then you are ready to present it to the world. Some are very comfortable with their social permaculture profile, but wouldn't use the definition widely, not to scare their users or stakeholders. Another common denominator for most of the organizations that did accept to have a chat and contributed somehow to my thinking for this informal research I'm conducting is their point of departure. They were already created as socially engaged art organization, and the transition towards a natural-based approach organization was easy enough. This would prove the connection that can be expanded by working as nature or environmental justice, being an organic bunch of social justice, generally at the core of socially engaged art practices. This has been very different in my case for us at Void Art Center, where we are still in the process of transforming an organization still very entangled with modernist understandings of art and use of its devices like the solo show, the commissioning, the exhibition making, the event-based programs. Interestingly, while some organizations don't feel ready to share their experience or use the term with their communities of interest, there is an interesting case I would like to start with of a very vocal organization in Paris called Palais de Tokyo. And here we start with the case studies. So Palais de Tokyo, probably some of you know of this organization or visited it, is a dynamic place for contemporary artists and the Europe's largest contemporary art center since 2012, following the renovation of its entire space. So it's massive. Located between the Eiffel Tower and the Champs-Élysées, rich in unique architecture and an exciting history, Palais de Tokyo is a space to learn, to experience, to feel, and to live. I'm just using their words from their website. In January 2022, Guillaume Desanger becomes the director. And in an interview to Art Forum that you can find online, announcing his new role at Palais de Tokyo, he said he considered the museum a living body and that he plans to establish a sustainable permaculture. His plans included partnering with both local and international art institutions and schools, among other organizations, and presenting a major exhibition or event outside the museum's confine every 2 years. So in February 2023, he actually published these, again, available for free online if you are interested. A 19-page long booklet titled On Institutional Permaculture for a Living and Productive Side of Contemporary Creation. So since we are very diligent at Boyd, we took it, we examined it, we studied it together as a team, and also we shared with our public, and we felt quite excited about what was written on those pages. So in 2024, I could finally visit in person Palais de Tokyo, thanks to a curatorial grant by Fluxus, and I had a brief meeting with the director and a member of his team. 2 years had passed since the start of his leadership and his permacultural statement, and the team had only gone through 1 day of workshop with an agricultural expert. I know it's difficult to grasp part of the transformation process, but I would say I had the feeling that this specific example was more the vision of a single individual than a collective mission of an art organization, and therefore, though very vocal, probably not very significant, at least for now. Let's stay tuned and see what they will do in the future. This instead, I think, is one of the most meaningful examples since they are influencing lots of institutions around the UK. They are a social enterprise using creativity and imagination to fuel learning, development, and change. They are pioneers in the use of permacultural design to support and develop regenerative creative practice. They are particularly interested in working in ways which focus upon the development of regenerative cultures and healthy, adaptable, and abundant communities. Their work is grounded in the ethics of earth, care, people, care, and fair share, and seeks to create space for imagination, thinking, and togetherness, out of which learning and community may grow. They do this by designing, curating, and managing creative public engagement events, activities, and projects, developing and delivering training, mentoring, and development support with focus upon public engagement and regenerative cultures, writing publications and resources, and supporting research primarily focused upon the field of creative community engagement. So I would say one of the strengths of this organization, they deliver plenty of training for social permaculture. If any of you is interested and you don't find a better offer wherever you are, you could get in touch and they will do it. It's for artists, for organizations, for curators. Left Coast. This is another example. It delivers highly engaging and socially useful arts and cultural projects in Blackpool. They discover and celebrate the everyday wisdom found in the lived experience of the town's residents and sensitively elevate the collective skills and ideas of the people that live there through creative and purposeful endeavors. It's established in 2013. They are now one of the 31 Creative People and Places CPP programs funded by the Art Council England. And they are steered by Blackpool Coastal Housing, Blackpool Council, local cultural partners, participant volunteers, and community grassroots organizations. Additionally, alongside both national and international artists, they collaborate with local creatives with intrinsic knowledge of the neighborhoods they work with. In the next 10 years, they will continue to work with Blackpool residents at the cultural intersections between art and social justice, health and well-being, and skills development. They will use creativity proactively, contribute to climate action plan for the town, and they will grow their expertise in art forms and technologies they don't know even that now exist to engage more participants, make more art, and add more value. What's in a nutshell, they confess while we were having our call, is that for them, permaculture is a reference in the ethics they apply to their work. So they haven't implemented the governance so far, they haven't changed much their programming, but definitely is a reference for them. I had the pleasure of talking with Emily Gee, who I had met before during her time at FACT in Liverpool, and she is now senior producer for Heart of Glass. Heart of Glass is a Merseyside-based community arts organization. They bring together artists and communities to make collaborative art and provide support, resources, and opportunities to artists and anyone interested in social engagement practice. They believe that art has the power to bring us together, imagine new futures, and create real change. Their aim is to create spaces where people can bring their different lived experience, knowledge, and perspectives in order to understand the world differently together. This project started in Liverpool in 2014 as a Creative People and Place project, so you can see the commonalities. They are also a CPP. Converted then in an organization in 2015 and became an NPO. For those of you who don't know, this abbreviation is a National Portfolio Organization, means a regularly funded organization in England. So they became an NPO in 2018. They started to feel out of sync with their policies around 2023 and found in permaculture a way to create proximity between their governance and their programming. So basically, they noticed that some of the ways they were working with their own communities didn't entirely correspond with the way they were trying to state their own governance and their own protocols as an organization. So they wanted to transform, and they did it by the use of permaculture. They created a permaculture working group in the team and the board, and were able to connect the team dynamics with project dynamics rather than feeling a split between the way they operate at a governance level with the ways they operate at a project level. Their permaculture approach is reflected in their action plan and new policies combining the environmental policy with EDI. They also wrote a new ethical fundraising policy. So the organization uses regenerative practice as a modus operandi. At the start of each project, they set questions that they include permaculture focus. So this means, again, rather than using some of the values or the characteristic imposed to all of us via a council, they would use permaculture to basically try to understand what are really the objectives that they want to achieve in the projects they are delivering. They have a care structure, a different use of time. So it means also they are rethinking their speed. And same as we do at Void, they try to connect with the seasons. So they use the winter for reflection, and they have also a different way of sharing their space and their practice, try to include as much as possible everybody that is involved in their locale. They found quite difficult to moderate energy. So as you can see, it's not all great. You need to really understand how much you can really go with this approach. But sometimes they find difficult to basically regather and also stop and take a moment to rethink how they are working. For this project, I spoke with the director of the project called Scott Barrell. So he's the director of Free Rivers, and he was extremely generous and super upfront with his ideas. So for those of you that never encountered Free Rivers is a free-floating social arts agency. They work with local partners to support creative practices which recognize, resource, and respond to people, places, land, and community in the London borough of Bexley. They bring local people and partners together to actively use arts and culture to make a difference in their own neighborhood. They collaborate with the people who live, work, and study there to produce festivals, run radio stations, become art critics, and stitch quilts. They want to create a new way of making culture in Bexley by empowering local people to make it themselves. They support what's already there. So again, this is very permacultural. They know that amazing art and culture have always been made in Bexley, in community centers, libraries, church halls, and front rooms, but now they are making it public. They make new connections. They bring voluntary community and cultural organizations together with artists and work with them to create projects for the people who say art isn't for them. They keep it in the community. They sometimes invite artists and experts from the rest of London and beyond, but they always make sure it's local people and partners that are running the show. They share what they have got. They try to ensure that their local partners hold at least half of the money they are working with on a project so that the relationship they build are as equal as possible. Free Rivers is funded by Art Council England through a program called Creative Place and People, so it's another CPP, which focusing on parts of England where involvement in the arts and culture is significantly below the national average. Bexley is one of those places, and Free Rivers is the result of it. Their program is hosted by PWB Trust with support from Orbit Housing and Red House National Trust. Free Rivers takes its name from the three main rivers that define the geography of Bexley: the Thames, the Cray, and the Shuttle, which are represented on borough's coat on arms. The name also reflects the free-floating nature of what they are trying to do. They want to give local people the power to decide what art and culture happens in their community. Who knows where it will end up? So here we are talking about an organization that is deeply working with permaculture to the level of changing even their economical structure. And interestingly, they started to work as an expanded group, so more and more community members are part of it. And they kicked off in 2022. They see that each project is a partnership and that art comes as secondary. So for them, the definition of all this as an art project is almost irrelevant. What they really care about is that this is culture and this culture for their community. One important thing to mention, I would say, is that Free Rivers is going to have a speaker for living soon. One of their team members is getting trained at the Zoop. In a Zoop, the voices and interests of other than human life are actively represented by so-called speaker for the living and are thus included in decision-making at all levels. A Zoop goes through a cyclical, iterative learning process together with its speaker for the living to figure out step by step how the organization can become symbiotic with the ecosystem it participates in. The process is not linear, but organic. It grows. Speakers for the living have basic ecological knowledge, are good with people, and know something of the working atmosphere of the Zoop, in which they represent the interest of other than human life, but they do not have to know everything. Speakers for the living are appointed by Zoonomic Foundation and supported by the Council for the Living. I don't know if you are familiar with these. It would be good Also to know if you know of other example of other organizations that are implementing with the use of the Zoop and the speaker for the living. Another example this time, so as you can see, we went through France, England, now we are going to Scotland, my favorite place in the world. Charlotte Montford, the director of LAC, gifted me a bit of her time to talk about their organization approach. So LAC is Scotland's most northerly mainland art centre, presenting an annual programme of live performance across Caithness alongside contemporary visual arts and an extensive participatory programme of educational and socially engaged arts projects led by local creatives in their community. LAC strives to be a nationally and internationally recognized industry-leading small arts center that practices radical localism and challenges conception about what it means to be rural. Their Caithness community is at the heart of everything they do, and they work across the county, acting as a cultural hub for the north of Scotland. LAC's main site is situated in a converted Victorian village, a school, surrounded by trees and aged stone walls. The interior has been imaginatively converted to a dynamic, multi-purpose art center. This includes a fully equipped 60-seat black box studio theater, which converts into an exhibition space, backstage facilities, public cafe and bar, purpose-built accommodation for visiting performance and artists. LAC was established by the visionary William Wilson, an accomplished artist and musician who worked in film and television in London before returning to his native Caithness. And what became as a gallery grew in an intimate venue, which regularly overspilled into William's home in the adjacent schoolhouse. Over 40 years, LAC has become the center cultural hub for Caithness and North Sutherland. In April 2017, LAC became a registered charity and appointed Charlotte Montford and Tom Barnes as co-directors to lead the organization into a new era. And over the past few years, the Art Center has gone from strength to strength. LAC now employs a small core team of people working hard to bring you the very best of culture you can get there. Charlotte arrived to social permaculture via growing. So she actually told me that during COVID, she started to grow. Lots of people did that, also as a therapeutic way of reconnecting with us as human and nature. And she could finally notice how extractive the model that they had been using at LCA was. So therefore, she thought that maybe if I try to implement the way I work with the land to the way I'm actually working with the organization, that will create a different dynamic. She did the course with small things with the organization I mentioned before. The person leading that course is called Liz, a marvelous human being. And therefore, from that moment, they developed a tool that they could apply as a social permacultural model to LAC using regenerative practice. And basically, the way that she was describing it to me is exactly as you would design a field. So I don't know if you ever done this in your life, but when you have a piece of land, and above all, if you're using permaculture, you would use as the first sort of parameter, the zones. So where I am standing now, this is my first zone, and is zone 0, it's me. And over here is still zone 0, and just a little bit farther is zone 1, and then zone 2 and 3 and 4. So you start to establish a design that considers the point of departure, the central point of your field, to then go farther and farther. So you are designing something that not only contemplates what the ecosystem is hosting, like the diversity of plants, the diversity of elements, but also the zoning. And one of the reasons why you do that is to monitor how much effort you really need to put in that work. Because sometimes, I would say above all in the arts, we are overstretching ourselves and therefore going from zone 0 to zone 40 without understanding that that's not going to be entirely possible. So they are using these, they are using the zoning. They are also using zoning evaluation. So from time to time, they go back to the zones that they have operated and they reflect on how difficult was that? How far away is that? Can we stretch a little bit farther? So the zoning is the basic tool for them to actually grow on the field, in this case, on the field of the organization. She also shared with me 3 documents, the environmental policy that they designed, their program outline, and their project plan. Again, I would say this is not very common. Most people would be quite suspicious or would try to be quite jealous or even worried about sharing these sort of documents. But in a permacultural spirit, the idea is that everything you produce is copyleft. So you would try to use commoning as a modus operandi. And therefore, even the fact that she felt somehow relaxed in sharing these documents was very important, I would say. And I think I'm going a bit over time, so I'll try to accelerate. The other example comes from Germany and is the Kunsthaus Stuttgart. I will just briefly say that so it was funded by artists in the late 70s and is definitely a very vital space for rethinking. But recently, a couple of new directors, Stephen Wright and Tamarind Rossetti, now I have a blank on the surname, they became the director of this organization and started to work in the same way that they are working with their field. So as you can see, there is an affinity between them and Charlotte. And one of the things, I think one of the most important things to notice is that they started to change the vocabulary. So you can even see it from this page. They speak about atmospheres, which are like the programs, but they also speak of usership rather than attendance. And they are also trying to disregard the idea itself of the events. Things, as you know, they cannot all happen at once. So the website is not entirely representative sometimes of all our transformations because it takes time to convince everybody, the communication department, the board, that there are certain words that perhaps are more applicable. But I think this is a very good example in that meaningful curatorial transformation using regenerative practice. And before going into a bit of details about Void, I will give you the last example coming from the marvelous island of Ireland. And this is Blackbird Culture Lab. It's a creative cultural laboratory based within a working farm that is transitioning towards regenerative agricultural practices and regenerative artist practices. It aims to provide an environment for farmers, artists, academics, and practitioners from various disciplines to experiment and work beyond traditional boundaries. It's run by 2 dear friends, Ocean and Carla, and they both have years of experience of work in the arts, education, social science, and agriculture, and they are working to transition their own farm from traditional methods to regenerative agriculture, and their art organization from mainstream approach to regenerative art. They believe it's important of developing and nurturing all the ecosystem process, including community dynamics. So as you can see, another very different example. This is not an existing organization that had to create a transition, but is something that started as a regenerative project. And it's a very interesting project. They host plenty of residency. Keep an eye on them. I would highly recommend to visit. And so last but not the least, ta-da! So this is where I have the joy to work since 3 years now. I joined Void Art Center as director in May 2023 and applied for this position with a clear and specific idea to convert this organization into the first social permaculture organization of Northern Ireland. In 2024, the organization commenced a living practice of social permaculture, a concept by which communities look to natural environments to model coexistence and co-creation. So Void's organizational structure is now founded on those principles of coexistence and co-creation. I would say, but maybe some of you in the public present here or online can contradict me, that this practice is atypical of the usual artistic methodology in Northern Ireland. instead prioritizing the three permacultural pillars of people care, health care, and fair share, sorry. So it's quite a transformation for us. And throughout this, Void has also begun engaging with other organizations, both within art sector and also other sectors, in order to share resources and knowledge. So this reflects our desire for a sustainable, environmentally conscious, and civically engaged art sector and world, which we are committed to working into our day-to-day practice. So since we started, and as a result of this, Void has adopted a slower pace and methodology. Void now has 4 projects a year, mimicking the seasons, both in energy and in spirit. It means that there are seasons where perhaps we are hibernating a little bit, and we really need to take it slow. And there are seasons in which we are actively engaging with the site and we are way more sparkling. So it's a joy, I would say, to try to connect with the seasons that are around us. And when I say 4 projects, I mean 4 big projects that occupy our galleries. We always have a flow of parallel, different sort of programs and different engagements. Again, sometimes they are fewer in certain seasons and way more in other seasons, depending on how is that the season is allowing us to have, as many hours of sun and light, or perhaps, moments in which we really need to actively move and be active in the space. Void's team is small at present, consisting of 6 people, more or less. Is Sinead Finney, the coordinator of production and dynamics, who is right now on maternity leave, and her maternity leave is covered by Shakira Nellis, which is also working as our facility assistant. Cecilia Graham, curator of civic engagement, Mitch Cullen, head of sustainable growth, and myself as director. And we have also lots of volunteers and students that would come in and try to learn more about how we work. While we all have our own job titles, and as you can see, the job titles are very creative. If you need more clarification around those titles, I'm around and I can explain. But I would say that tasks and responsibilities are specific to our jobs, but they are also shared between all of us. So there is a great deal of cohabitation between the different functions that we need to perform in our jobs. And there is like a shared responsibility. I would say there is not really shared accountability. We know exactly what is that we need to do, what are the specific accountabilities of our jobs, but there are certain tasks that we know that we can share and we would do it. So this feeds into our living and working practice of social permaculture, in particular the idea of people care and fair share. So rethinking how many hours we are really working, what is the speed we can work, to decreasing the amount of events. If you look at our webpage, it looks like we have been perhaps a bit cut off, but it's not that. It's really we are trying to understand how carefully we can look after the energy of everybody involved. And Void's future ambition is to ensure our programs and the organization as a whole are sustainable and civic engaged. This entails more attention and care towards the team, our resources and local environment, responding to this ambition. And Void, focusing on alternative ways of producing, distributing, and presenting our projects. This includes responding to our locality, working with Derry and Northern Ireland to reflect the global changes we are all part of. Like our internal working, our programming investigates ways of working together and collaborative and cooperative practices within the arts and within our sector. We are forming organic connection with the site of Derry and its audiences, as well as sustainable use of local resources, both monetary and non-monetary. We have adopted a different use of time within our programming. Our activities include both one-off, recurrent, and long-term projects, with some projects spanning only the length of the exhibition, and others resulting in further research and public reflection. Some components of the program run throughout the year, developing into long-term projects across multi-year period. Process is a key aspect of our programming. with on-site and off-site activities focusing on genuine connection with the public rather than outcome-oriented working. And central to this work is civic engagement with public input essential in all stages of our projects. So I will close with this slide. This is actually just like a picture of the first project we started as a fully formed team, and that's I curated, that was called Composting for the Future. And this, I think, the best example that encapsulates how is that we are changing our way of working. So what we did was to actually start with our compost. Again, if you're not growing, you probably wouldn't understand the similarities here, but if you have a piece of land, compost is very important. It's something that you use to nurture the soil. So our composting went into the past 20 years of void and also in the future of void. So this was the first gallery, gallery 1, and you can see over there are some pictures. We invited local practitioners to actually select some of the pictures of our archive and basically go through all the events that happened in the 20 years of void. But also, we invited everybody that would pass by the exhibition to use that desk and that computer to generate their own event. So as if something very important happened in Derry or in my life, in my family, or in another organization I was part of in the past 20 years. And it should be part of your timeline. It should be part of those pictures. It should be part of those events, fundamental part of these last 20 years. So the composting was just a way to look in the past and look in the future. But as you know, you constantly need to keep your compost alive. So every year we return our compost. So during April, May, generally, we return the compost. And so soon we are going to return our compost, which means to review everything that happened from 23, 24, 25, but also trying to understand what is our trajectory for the future. I really hope that this gave you a glimpse of what I wanted to convey as nature-based approaches and how we are trying to use it at Void. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you can come and visit us soon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Viviana. It's been really great to hear you talking about your experience at the Void, but also other examples, other case studies. Now it's time for questions. We have, I think, 15, 20 minutes. So if you have any questions, it's the time. One from Susie.
Hi, thanks for your talk. It was interesting to hear you talk about how you're considering care and energy levels in regards to your team and yourself. I just wondered how that is implemented with the artists that you work with as well.
So that's a very good question. Thank you so much. And it requires a bit of a complex answer. So on one side, we are trying to transition in the use of time also with our engagement with the artist, thinking that we would need to establish a time of engagement with them of maybe 3 years. So to create a fellowship together with the artist so that they can stay engaged with us over a longer period of time. Because if not, we contribute in the speeding up. And right now we are applying for that to happen, financially speaking. I would say so far, we haven't performed super well in that respect, because Void has a strong portfolio from the past of being a very interesting organization for both exhibitions and public program. But that means that the funders that would support us would generally support new commissions for artists. And the new commissions are therefore set to be speedy boarding. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like giving the artist the opportunity, sometimes from 3,000 to 10,000 or more for a new production. but not giving the time for the new production to really happen. Because it could be like a cycle of a year, max, I would say, sometimes 6 months. So it can be very, very hard. So in the past 3 years, we haven't succeeded to change that, not yet. But now we are advocating for that. I would say it's very difficult to convince funders that that's something that needs to change. Because obviously there are lots of different factors against us. The novelty, like everything needs to be new. So it needs to be the new commission. And also the strong relationship with the exhibition, they need to be able to see an outcome. The outcome is the exhibition. And even if you say, no, the outcome can be many things, that's another problem. And also the fact that some artists are stretched with so many different commissions that perhaps they will not be able to commit to what we imagine is a longer period of time. So we haven't tested it so far because we haven't found the right funder to support that different time engagement with the artist. But it's one of the things that we are trying to change. And thank you so much for the question. That's a very important question.
Thank you. That was a wonderful paper. And I wonder if I can follow up with a question about your own practice at Void, which is, of course, in a part of the world that has had a complex and troubled history and a much more optimistic recent past. Can you tell us a bit about how your practice incorporates the specificity of the local area in what you're trying to do?
Sure. So I would say that we as a team depart from a belief that there is culture everywhere and there is important culture also in Derry. And obviously depends how you define culture, because it could be food, like culinary knowledge, or it could be theater, or it could be engineering. So we tend to connect with all the different components of what we believe is culture, from the university to community groups, the local council, in order to integrate it into what we do. And also for the culture to generate from the side rather than from the center. When I say the center, I mean Void. I would say I really need to reference who this approach is coming from in my professional life, because it's not my idea. For years, I was working at the Centre for Contemporary Arts in Glasgow, and the director there, Francis McKee, who is also from Northern Ireland, thought that it was really important to devote more and more attention to citizen-led activities, so that for anything that was happening in town, it could be metal music or the interest in a specific form of dance, they would program inside the Center for Contemporary Arts. So that it's not the curator that has the vision of what people would like to see, but people know exactly what they would like to see. And therefore, why don't we leave them space to curate? We can help in the process and share our expertise, but they would know what is the culture that they want to generate. So this is an overall, I would say, answer to explain how we integrate the culture of Derry, and also to think that lots of ideas can be generated from Derry. Derry doesn't need to be a place of arrival, things coming from somewhere else and then presented in Derry, but a place of departure, where things are generating from Derry, perhaps reaching other places. Because you are mentioning the specific troubled past, if you are asking how we would relate as an organization to the historical past of Derry, I would say that we choose to have a position that is not in the past, but in the future. So Derry had a past, and there are people in Derry that would know exactly how to deal with that past. Obviously, I was not there. I haven't been living there. And it would be, I would say, very difficult for me to not, let's say, start to engage with the past and perhaps figuring out that I'm not doing it correctly from their standards, or I'm entering an history that really is very, very delicate and doesn't belong to me in some respect. So the idea is we position it for the future of Derry. We acknowledge that there is a past. Every single project would connect with something that is historically relevant for the city of Derry, but we don't focus on that expertise. We focus on the expertise of creating the trajectory for the culture that is now and it will come. Does that answer the question?
Oh, okay.
It's okay. Thanks a lot. That's really interesting. I just want, when you talk about funders, could you give us an example of who are the funders? And you talk about short-term funding and long-term funding. And therefore, if you're looking for more long-term funding, compared to the current funders, what kind of funders are you looking for that would be more engaged in a long-term sustainable approach? I mean, are we talking about individuals, NGOs? Are we talking about public? Thanks.
John, you just tackled the question of questions in the arts, the money. Let's talk about it. So, yeah, it's a very important point. So we would be an NPO in the standards of Northern Ireland, the National Portfolio Organisation, or as it is called in Scotland, the RFO, Regularly Funded Organisation. But within the United Kingdom, we are an exception within the 4 nations, because everybody else in Scotland, England, and Wales can apply for cycles of 3 years funding. But, believe it or not, we can only apply every year. So that creates an enormous amount of precariousness. And you will see some white hair on my head. They are all connected with this precariousness. So basically, financial year in the UK starts in April and ends in March. In December, we need to apply for our regular funding, which is the Art Council Northern Ireland. And then we would hear from the Art Council Northern Ireland sometimes around summertime. So it means that I can run the organization during springtime with a huge risk of not getting the funding for the next year without knowing. Is a little bit predictable.
Has it got anything to do with Brexit? No, it's not, because there's an Irish question there of difference.
No, it is to do with, as far, and I hope I'm not, yeah, I'm somehow not misrepresenting the case, but Northern Ireland for a period of time was without a government, and now basically readdressing how they are using the funding is also taking some time. Therefore, is a decision that is annually based. So our main funder is that, and we get the funding every year. I would say, I'm not going to share all the details of our figures, but if you look at our budget, which, by the way, you can find online, we are fully transparent, you can find all the numbers. Probably what we get is a third of what same size art center would get in the Netherlands or in Sweden, but still within Northern Ireland landscape, we get quite a lot. So we are very privileged. And then we get a very small part of funding from the local council, Derry and Strabane City Council, which I want to thank immensely. Without their help, we couldn't pay the rent. So we don't own the building, we need to pay the rent, and the rent is very dear. And then we have lots of different other private foundations that we apply to regularly. Some of these foundations have been created by artists that use their surplus to support other artists. Some of these foundations are rich families, donors, patrons that after a while recreated foundations. Some are connected with banks. So there is a careful picking and choosing of who we really want to get support from. I would say, the landscape of funders can be really unethical as well. So there are lots of choices that would implement why is that we would choose one funders against another. But what we decided, and this is what I've been designing together with the head of sustainable growth since I started, was that in the past in Void, there would be indiscriminate fundraising. They would get money from lots of different things. But it also meant that the fundraising perhaps was for working with a deaf and blind community project. And then after 6 months, it was about women And therefore that creates a lot of waste because you need constantly to readapt to the different agendas that you are somehow adopting from the funders. So now our style is very different. We decide before what we want to achieve, all the programs, the objectives, the things that we really care about, and then we apply for things that are really connected with those. So we file perhaps less applications, but we have way better results, and we are getting some good money for things that we really want to achieve, rather than, you know, somehow changing constantly our positions and interest and our skills as well. And then specifically about the transformation of longer fellowships, I cannot reveal who we are applying for at the moment because we are in the sort of shortlist moment and they could be listening online to this. But is a private foundation and is like funded by a donor that then created his own fund. I already revealed the gender, but is a person that created a private foundation. And I would say we would be extremely lucky to get their support because, again, there are not so many opportunities like this in Northern Ireland. The investment is very scarce in comparison with the rest of the 4 nations. And that I think is across all typology of funding infrastructure, governmental and private. Does that answer?
Hi, Viviana. Thank you so much. This was very inspiring. I had a question because I also have, I'm part of a collective that works on arts and ecology, and we often ask ourselves what we mean by nature. So I was just wondering if, you know, studying these case studies, you kind of like can give us sort of a description of permaculture, like what type of nature, because of course, like the interpretation that we give of nature is cultural, right? Like it's as we'll call nature and describe it. So I was just curious about this. And related to this, I was also curious about how this type of approach, which is very interesting in the way like affects the entire environment of the place you work with, manages conflict, because we also worked a lot, for example, on like talking about ecology, the system of domination and oppression that inhabits it. So there are like a lot of different approaches, transformative justice or things like that. And I was just wondering if you kind of had that conversation and what was the thinking about, like, how do you talked about accountability, which is a very important word. And I was just curious, like how this conversation, if you had any, went. Thanks.
Sylvia, sorry, can I ask to clarify? So the second part of the question, the conversation within the team or with who?
No, I mean, I was curious if you have a sort of conversation in your team, in your work regarding conflict and how to manage conflict in this kind of environments that, of course, want to challenge the issues of domination and this type of things, like power dynamics, let's say.
Thank you so much. So these are 2 difficult questions. I'll try my very best to answer. About the definition for nature, what I've noticed that is kind of used the most would be the relationship really with natural elements. So I would say it's quite evident that whenever having conversations with these other practitioners, they either would use metaphors like I do with farming, with the soil, or they would really reconnect with this idea of more than human. So that is between the most common definitions that I have found in conversation with the people I had interviews with. About the conflict, my partner always reminds me that I think of nature as something so nice and beautiful, but actually nature can be very cruel, and there are lots of, different dynamics between the plants and the animals. And so I know you now think I'm very naive and romanticizing all nature, but no, I understand that that's the case. I really do. And therefore, even within an organization, not just Void, I mean, in general, creating an organization that is nature-based, conflict is around the corner constantly, the whole time. The tension, also the fact that people are really reluctant to change. We have been living for so long in a certain way, and if all of a sudden, or even gradually, someone is telling us, what if we try something different? Our body, our brain will resist, even if just a little bit. It will resist. So conflict and the tension that comes with it is part of it. So with the team at Void, when we started the process, we went through coaching. All the team went through coaching. We established our values and also our modes of communication, thinking also that this would be a way to decrease the opportunities of conflict, because somehow we are setting the parameters. This is how we are going to play this game. These are the rules. This is what I want to see. These are the values I really want to apply in our work. And then we also got all trained together in social permaculture. And during the training, we spoke about non-verbal communication, non-violent communication, all sorts of different communications that could help a better environment to, once again, decrease conflict. And I would say that after some times now practicing, we find that we are still not top-notch on the topic. And in fact, as part of our returning, we are now inviting a practitioner from Cork, so from the island of Ireland, to basically retrain us or rethink with us how is that we work around communication and conflict. So which means that we are not still there. We need to work more, I would say, on that. But again, even the fact that as a group of human beings, we got to this conclusion that with our best intention and all the coaching and all the training and all the establishing of the common values, still we think we need more, because we need to understand exactly conflict resolution and how it would operate for ourselves and people coming in our ecosystem. Because, like people are constantly gravitating around us. So there are tensions that sometimes appear, not even as a team, but as a satellite of the team. So I hope that there will be something there for us to explore better, but this is still in process, I would say. Does that answer?
Okay.
I can see that there is someone online.
Okay, so maybe because we are running out of time, so maybe we can forward you, I don't know, the questions. Exactly, and you can answer.
Sì, ce ne sono un po'.
Uff.
Se le mandiamo via mail.
Ok.
Scegli una adesso e le altre le mandiamo via mail.
Ce ne
Yeah?
sono tante.
Okay.
Okay.
So for all of you online, we ran out of time.
Yeah.
In typical Viviana style, it's my fault. But they are telling me that I will choose one, and then I can answer.
Yeah, maybe you can answer to everyone after, because we are
All of them?
all of
Yeah,
them.
so I will not answer to anybody. That's better, no? Yeah, so the organization, BSR,
give
will
us the
make sure that they will
responsibility.
pass me the
Yeah.
answer, sorry, the questions, and then I will make sure that I can send you the
Yeah.
answers. I'm very sorry about this, but thank you so much for being online and participating in this remotely.
Okay, thank you, and sorry
Thanks so much.
for the online audience. Okay, so we can continue the conversation upstairs with drinks, and thank you again for coming tonight, and thank you again to Viviana.
Thank you.